Every Saturday morning, Noah walked through the same neighborhood, always slowing down in front of one particular house. It wasn't a mansion, but to him it looked like the kind of place successful people eventually lived. He would imagine drinking coffee on the porch, waving to neighbors, and finally feeling like he had made it. Whenever life became frustrating, that house quietly became the picture of the future he wanted most. Years passed, and life slowly moved forward in ways he never expected when those walks first began. One afternoon, he drove into a neighborhood that looked strangely familiar, then suddenly realized where he was. The house was right there, exactly where it had always been, only this time he wasn't walking past it. He parked across the street and stared through the windshield, smiling because something impossible had finally happened. A few weeks later, the keys were in his hand, and the dream he carried for years had become reality. The first night felt unforgettable because every room reminded him how far he had come. For a while, even ordinary moments felt exciting simply because they happened inside the life he once imagined. Then the routines quietly returned, and the house slowly became just another place to wake up every morning. Before long, he found himself looking at larger homes whenever he drove through newer neighborhoods. Without noticing, the dream that once felt impossible had quietly become his new starting point. He wasn't appreciating what he had anymore because his attention kept drifting toward what came next. One evening, he looked around his living room and realized nothing felt different from before. The house had changed, but the feeling he spent years chasing seemed to have disappeared. That confused him because he thought reaching the destination was supposed to change something inside him forever. Standing on the same porch he once dreamed about, he asked himself a question he couldn't answer. If achieving the dream didn't create the feeling, maybe the feeling was never waiting at the destination. Before we continue, welcome to Lion Invests. This channel isn't about getting rich overnight. It's about questioning the financial beliefs that shape how we earn, spend, save, invest, and build wealth. Because what sounds true about money isn't always the full story. If you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology and systems behind financial decisions, consider subscribing. One quick note before we continue. I'm not a financial advisor. I simply enjoy researching financial psychology, behavioral economics, and investing. Everything shared here is for educational purposes to help you think more critically and make more informed financial decisions. Now, let's see what this story is really revealing. Maybe you've experienced something similar without even realizing it was happening in your own life. We often believe feeling rich comes from reaching a specific destination instead of understanding how our minds measure progress. That sounds reasonable until you notice people at every income level saying they still need just a little more. If money alone created the feeling of wealth, that pattern wouldn't be nearly as common as it is. So, the real question isn't how much money makes someone feel rich, but why the feeling keeps slipping away. The answer begins with something your brain does automatically, whether you notice it or not. Your mind isn't designed to stay excited forever, because constant excitement would eventually become exhausting. Instead, your brain adapts to almost everything that improves your life, no matter how meaningful it once felt. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, but you don't need the name to recognize the experience. Think about something you desperately wanted a few years ago that now feels completely ordinary. It might be your home, your car, your phone, or simply the life you're living today. Whatever once felt extraordinary slowly became your new normal without asking for your permission. That's one of the greatest strengths of the human mind, but it also creates an unexpected financial problem. Every improvement resets your expectations, making yesterday's dream feel like today's starting point. The destination hasn't moved, yet your definition of enough quietly changes with every new achievement. That's why chasing the feeling of being rich can become an endless race without a visible finish line. The problem isn't always that you're making too little. Sometimes your expectations are simply moving faster than your appreciation. Here's where the story becomes even more interesting, because this isn't only about money. It's about how humans naturally compare what they have with what they see around them. A perfectly good life can suddenly feel incomplete after one quick glance at someone else's success. Nothing in your life actually changed, yet your emotions immediately tell a different story. That's because your brain rarely measures wealth in isolation. It measures it through comparison. Imagine earning exactly the same amount you earn today in a world where everyone else earned half as much. Now imagine earning that same amount while everyone around you earned twice as much. Your paycheck hasn't changed, but your feeling about it probably has. That reveals something most people never stop to question about the idea of being rich. Feeling wealthy isn't determined only by numbers. It's heavily influenced by perspective. Companies understand this better than most people realize, and they quietly build entire industries around it. Every advertisement introduces another version of a better life waiting just beyond your current one. A newer car, a larger home, a luxury vacation, or the latest technology suddenly becomes the new standard. The message is rarely spoken directly, but it's always quietly present in the background. What you have is good, but what comes next is supposed to make you happier. After hearing that message thousands of times, it's easy to mistake desire for necessity. The line between wanting more and needing more slowly begins to disappear. Before long, satisfaction depends less on what you own and more on what you haven't reached yet. That's why many people spend years chasing a feeling that keeps moving farther into the distance. And the farther that feeling moves, the more convinced they become that money alone must be the missing piece. But here's the surprising part. More money can absolutely improve your life without making you feel permanently rich. Money solves many real problems, and pretending otherwise ignores reality. It can provide safety, opportunity, freedom, and choices that simply aren't available without it. The mistake is expecting money to permanently change a feeling your brain naturally adjusts to. That's asking money to solve a psychological problem instead of a financial one. Once you recognize that difference, your relationship with wealth begins to change. Instead of constantly asking, "How much more do I need?" you begin asking a better question. What does enough actually look like for the life I want to live? That question is uncomfortable because it forces you to define success for yourself. Without your own definition, someone else will gladly define it for you. Social media, advertising, and culture are always ready to tell you what your next upgrade should be. If you never stop to question those messages, they'll quietly become your personal goals. The result is a life spent chasing expectations you never intentionally chose. Real financial confidence begins when your decisions reflect your values instead of everyone else's opinions. That doesn't mean you stop growing or stop pursuing bigger goals. It means your goals become intentional instead of automatic. You start measuring progress against your own past instead of someone else's present. Ironically, that's often the moment people begin feeling wealthier without earning another dollar. Because appreciation grows when comparison loses its influence, and once that happens, money becomes a tool for building your life instead of a score keeping you trapped. This doesn't mean you should stop pursuing success or pretend ambition is somehow the problem. Ambition can build incredible things when it's guided by purpose instead of endless comparison. The real question is whether you're chasing a meaningful destination or an ever-changing feeling. Those may sound similar, but they lead to completely different financial lives. A destination can eventually be reached, but a feeling keeps changing as your expectations change. That's why some people with modest incomes feel content, while others with enormous wealth still feel behind. The difference isn't always what they own. It's the story they believe about what enough should look like. Every financial decision begins long before you spend, save, or invest a single dollar. It begins with the beliefs quietly shaping what you think money is supposed to do for you. If those beliefs remain unquestioned, no amount of success will ever feel completely satisfying. But once you recognize those hidden patterns, you begin making decisions with far greater clarity. You stop confusing a higher lifestyle with a richer life because they aren't necessarily the same thing. You become more intentional about spending on what genuinely improves your life instead of impressing other people. You start saving and investing with patience because you're building freedom rather than chasing validation. And when setbacks happen, they no longer redefine your entire sense of financial success. That's one of the quiet advantages of understanding financial psychology instead of only learning financial tactics. The numbers matter, but the way you think about those numbers often matters even more. Because wealth isn't only something you accumulate, it's also something you learn to recognize. Maybe the reason you've never felt rich wasn't because you were always too far away. Maybe it was because the finish line existed only in your mind, and every time you reached it, you quietly moved it again.